Hey YouTube, this is CFL Fanatic here with your Week 19 picks for the 2009 CFL season. It's just about heading down to playoff time. Things are getting really exciting. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, let's take a look back and see how I did. 3-1. I think I did pretty good. Almost had that BC win. That takes my total to 10-5-1. You know, I'm doing really well. We've had some difficult picks, but I've overcome it. The last couple weeks I've gone 3-1. Alright, so instead of my 30-second rundown, we're going to talk a little bit about the race for the playoffs this year in the CFL. So these are the four teams that could miss the playoffs. The Hamilton Tiger Cats at 8-9, the BC Lions at 8-9, Edmonton Eskimos at 8-9, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at 7-10. Winnipeg has to win or they are gone this week. So we'll talk about some scenarios. If BC defeats Edmonton tonight and Hamilton defeats Winnipeg, then your playoffs are going to look something like this. You're going to have Edmonton playing Hamilton in the East Semi, and in the West Semi you're going to have BC playing either Calgary or Saskatchewan. Alright, so scenario number 2, you got Edmonton defeating BC and Hamilton defeating Winnipeg, then your playoffs are going to look like this. Instead, this time in the East Semi, you're going to have BC playing in Hamilton, and in the West Semi, you're going to have Edmonton playing Calgary or Saskatchewan. Alright, so our third scenario now. If BC defeats Edmonton, but Winnipeg defeats Hamilton, then that will tie their records, and your playoff will look something like this. Hamilton will play in Winnipeg, because Winnipeg won the season series, or would have won, and BC will play either Calgary or Saskatchewan. Edmonton will be out. But if Edmonton defeats BC and Winnipeg defeats Hamilton, then this is your final scenario. So it's going to look something like this. Your East final is going to be Hamilton and Winnipeg once again, except your West semi is going to be Edmonton and at Calgary or Saskatchewan. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, how can Hamilton miss the playoffs when they're in the playoff scenario for all this? Is it even possible? Well, actually, yes it is. I've demonstrated this. These are the standings, East to West. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about BC and Edmonton. They would have to tie tonight. Okay, and that will bring, there you go, their records respectively to 8-9-1. BC would have won the season series, which means they would get the last spot. Now, Winnipeg would have to beat Hamilton. That would take them both to 8-10. And since Winnipeg, after winning that game, would have won the season series, they would switch into second place. That would put Hamilton in third place at 8-10 once again. BC would get the third spot. Edmonton would be fourth. And since Edmonton would be fourth and have a record of 8-9-1, they would be better than Hamilton, who would be third and have a record of 8-10, and thus Hamilton would play Winnipeg in the East Semi. So it should be interesting to see how this all unfolds. Alright, Week 19. Let's do this for the last week of regulation. First up, Edmonton and BC. That game is going to happen tonight. And this is a huge game for both teams. Edmonton looked really solid in their game, but keep in mind they were playing the Argos. BC also looked really solid against Calgary. That was a great game to watch. And you know what? BC has proven that they can keep up with Calgary, who has clearly demonstrated themselves to be the best team in the West right now. In fact, probably the second best team in the league. So you know what? It's going to be close. But I'm going with the BC Lions to win this game. I think that they have what it takes. Alright, so we'll talk about this game. Montreal and Toronto. Now, I know the obvious choice would be Montreal, and I'm going to say, what happens if a giant meteor comes down and hits all the Alouette players, and they're all severely injured, and Montreal has to resort to using random fans from the crowd to play? So if Montreal is just playing with random people, and the Argos have their full team, who would win then? You want to take a guess? Yeah, that's right. The Alouettes would win. Toronto just sucks. Alright, so we'll move on to Calgary and Saskatchewan. First place in the West is at stake here. So this will be a very important game for each team. Now, Calgary is looking dominant. They nearly lost that game to BC. They won with that last second field goal. And you know what? After that 24-6 loss in Hamilton, I'm not really seeing much from Saskatchewan, so I'm going to have to go with the Stamps to win this one, and they would take first in the West. Alright, So we'll move on to our final game, Hamilton and Winnipeg. This is such an important game. This is a must-win game for Winnipeg. If they do not win, they are out of playoff contention. And you know what? I kind of don't really want to see that happen. I mean, Winnipeg's really turned things around from that team that was 3-8 and meeting the Argos. They've brought themselves up to 7-10. Their offense has ignited. But you know what? Hamilton is a strong team. They completely shut down the Riders last week, and their offense is still seems to be clicking. Not so much last week, but they had a bit of wind issues. So I am going to go with the Ticats to beat the Bombers, and that will officially put Winnipeg out of the playoffs. This has been CFL Fanatics Week 19 picks. Have a great week. Last week of regulation. Those are my picks again in case you missed them. Have a happy Week 19, everybody.